What's up, everybody? So I have a bit of show and tell for you today. I'm going to show you something that most likely you've never seen before. And here it is, without further ado. Here it is. This is, as you see, if you could read it, a prison discharge card. In case you can't see it, I'll read you all what the little thing says on here. But anyhow, so I'll show you again, don't worry. Anyhow, so I was in prison in California, in the United States, from 2000 to 2006, okay? And a fun fact about prison sentences in the United States, in case you don't know, is that you don't necessarily always do 100% of your sentence that you get in the United States. For example, my sentence was actually 7 years, but I got out of prison in 6 years. So they let you out early sometimes on what they call good time, or with good behavior. So if you go to prison, you're following the rules, and you don't commit any more crimes while you're in prison, and all that stuff. They can let you out earlier than you were sentenced in court. Okay, and different crimes have different minimum amounts of time that you have to do. Sometimes people get half time, so that means, like, say someone got 8 years, but say it was like a drug crime, just like they were just doing drugs or something, or selling drugs, whatever, and they got 8 years, and they might only have to do 50% of their sentence, so 4 years before they're allowed to be released from prison. Well, with my crime, I had to do 85%. So out of 7 years, I had to do at least 6 years before I was allowed to be released on good time for good behavior. And I was, generally good enough to be released early from my sentence. So they actually let me out. I got arrested in 2000 and I got out in 2006, which was approximately 85% of my sentence, right? Okay. However, when you're released early from your sentence, you have to do what's called parole. So basically what that is although you're being released from the actual prison, the physical location of prison, you're technically still under the authority and jurisdiction of that state that you were locked up in. Okay, so I was in California, so even though they physically released me from prison, they physically released me from prison, but since I'm on parole, that means I'm still again under their jurisdiction. And so that means that whatever house I go live in, they have a right to go search my house whenever they want, or whoever's house it is. Like, I was living in my grandmother's house when I got out, and they told me when I got out on parole, they was like, we have a right to come in the house whenever we want. We could search. They drug test you whenever they want. They tell you, hey, come down to the office and we drug test you. So you don't have rights as a normal citizen, again, because you're still under the authority and jurisdiction of the state prison system. You're on parole, okay? You can look that up more if you want. So anyhow, so I got out in 2006 on parole. And then after 2 years, as you've seen on the card, I got discharged. That's what this card is. Actually, I didn't even know it had the actual date. I thought it was just 2008, but July 8th, 2008. That was actually my discharge date. So that means that's the actual date where I'm totally released of custody from the state. So basically, I'm not a prisoner anymore whatsoever. So when you go on parole, technically you're still a prisoner, but you're living in your own house or whoever's house you're in, basically, right? Okay, so on that date, July 8th, 2008, I think they notified me a little bit before that I was going to be discharged, and then, they ended up giving me this card and saying, that's it. So that's it. You're not a prisoner anymore. So obviously it was a happy day for me, because it's like, officially, you're not a prisoner anymore. And again, like I said, when you're on parole, you don't have all the rights of a normal U.S. Civilian. They can search your house, drug test you. They could reprimand you into custody without due process. As many of you know, in the United States, you have a right to a trial and all that stuff. Not when you're on parole. If you're on parole and you get caught with drugs or a gun or sometimes even a knife, if that's part of the conditions of your parole, they could just take you right back to prison. No court, no trial, no crying. They don't care about none of that. They just take you straight back to prison, like literally straight back to prison. Okay? And so, yeah, the discharge is when you're like officially released, not just physically released from the prison. You're, on paper, literally on paper and on their papers. And this little card, the point of this little card, obviously is for you, because I kept it just for me. Just, makes you feel better. Hey, I got my discharge card. But also, more importantly, when you first get out, especially like if you're younger, like say you went to prison when you're 18 and you got out, say when you're 21 and you got a bunch of tattoos or whatever, and maybe you still live in the neighborhood that you were in before. Okay, a police officer or a probation officer or a parole officer might see you and might try to jack you up, be like, hey, I know you're on parole, and so they might think that you still don't have your rights, and they could just search you without consent, all this stuff, because they think that you're on parole. And you go, hold on, I have my discharge card. And so basically this is to, if the police hassle you and they're like, hey, are you still on parole, this and that, they might, like I said, try to jack you up or whatever. You're like, no, I discharged. No, I'm no longer on parole. Basically, I have my rights back. And so you can't just search me without consent. You can't just tell me I need to drug test or any kind of that stuff. You have your rights again. You're a regular civilian again, for the most part. As an ex-felon in the United States, you're not allowed to own a gun anymore. But that's a whole other thing. But anyhow, so yeah. So I'm curious if any of you actually have seen a discharge card before. Either, obviously, if you were locked up in somewhere in the United States, or if you know somebody. So now let me go over a couple of things that are on here. Okay, so obviously the date. So that's actually when I got discharged. So again, I got out in 2006. Actually released from the physical prison in 2006, June 7th, I think it was, something like that, right? And so 2 years later, a little over 2 years later, I actually got discharged. So that's the date. There's my full name, certificate of discharge. And if you see on there's a number T00929. I don't know if it's backwards for you guys, but it's T00929. That was my prison number. So when you go to prison in the United States, or at least in California, I don't know how it is in any other state, they give you a number kind of like a social security number, your identification number. And so that's how they identify, because obviously there's going to be people with the same name as you, sometimes even the same first and last name. So a number it's an extra identifier, and you'll usually go by that. They'll ask you, oh, what's your last name and what's your CDC number. It used to be called CDC. They used to be called just the California Department of Corrections. But they had to change that because the CDC, obviously, that acronym belongs to the Centers for Disease Control. So if you see on the top, it says California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. That actually changed while I was locked up. Sometime, I forget when, but sometime between 2000 and 2006, they changed from CDC, California Department of Corrections, to CDCR, again, because I think the actual CDC, Centers for Disease Control, they're like, hey, guys, that's our acronym. You need to add something to your acronym or whatever, because CDC is our acronym. So they did. So it became CDCR. And anyhow, so that's that. There's my name, my number. That was basically my number while I was in prison. They'd be like, hey, what's your name? Oh, Vermont is T00929. Oh, okay. And you use that to get canteen and just basically everything. That's like your social security number in prison. So there's that. My name, my number, the date that I got out, and then a little writing on the bottom. I haven't read it in a long time, but it says the above named person has been discharged from the jurisdiction of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation on all existing felony commitments as of this date. So again, and there's stuff on the back. Oh, parole region office numbers. I don't even know if these phone numbers are any kind of active anymore. I mean, just think, this card is 15 years old. This card might be older than some of you watching this video. This card is literally, that's 15 years, right? 2008, yeah, 15, that's 15 years old this card is. I still got it. But anyhow, like I said, one of the main points of this is if I happen to get pulled over by a cop or some other parole officer or whatever, they'll ask you. Sometimes dudes just have the look of, that they've been locked up before. And cops, they know. They know, and they'll be like, hey, are you on parole or anything like that? Not no more. I got my discharge card. So, yeah. Anyhow, so I've kept it all these years, kind of just for, I don't know, memories or whatever. I was happy to just get past all that in my life. Going to prison, all that, definitely not something I'm proud of. Completely stupid. It's one of those things you regret in life. Just all the stupid decisions you have when you're younger, and it still affects me to this day. Just the fact that I was locked up for 6 years, that means I didn't have work history for 6 years, and I didn't have relationships for 6 years, and all kinds of, it messes up your life. So so I was happy to get this, because I was like, I'm finally done with this nonsense that I had wrapped myself up into. I was starting to unravel myself from this nonsense, and they gave me this card, and my parole officer, there you go, and that's it. And I was like, wow, after all these years, because remember, like I said, I got locked up in 2000, and when I got this in 2008, that had been 8 years that I was under the jurisdiction of the state of California. And I was like, wow, finally, I'm just done with this nonsense. So anyhow, I thought that was pretty cool. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next video.